Fiscal.
Good evening, everyone. It's a little after 6:30. This is the Finance Committee, January 12th meeting, and this is the call to order. We do have a quorum. There are 5 present in council chambers and 2 by Zoom. And with that, we'll now move on to public comments. Any comments from the public in the room or on the virtual? Hearing none, we'll move on, and the next item is the,
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
yes?
Because you do have committee members both in the room and on Zoom, can you at least do a roll call to announce for the record as to who is all present?
Sure.
Thank you.
You want me to announce who the members are who are here?
You're supposed to, I guess, yeah.
Okay. Bill Dow, Chairman, George Conley, Vice Chair, Nicole Corbacero, Clerk, David Wyke, John Grace are here, Chana Keofunga, and I know I've mispronounced that, I'm sorry, Chana, and Natalie Riley are on Zoom. Okay? Okay, moving along. The Joint Budget Subcommittee, committee charge and role, and Jamie, I guess you'll handle that. I do believe I saw that on the town council's goals for this term. And it came up a little bit faster than I expected for us, but go ahead and take it away.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So thank you to the committee and the folks watching at home. So it is on the town council goals. And just a little bit of background for the folks that are watching from home. In the past, we've had the Joint Budget Subcommittee has been kind of a outreach effort, if you will, of the 3 main committees of the Finance Committee, the Town Council, and the School Committee to kind of address and listen as a group to one another regarding operating budget matters only. And traditionally, I think the members of the school committee who are picked for the budget committee, the members of the town council and the finance committee respectively, the members that have been assigned those areas of liaison have traditionally made up that committee. I've been here a little over 6 years. I think we've had maybe 3 joint budget subcommittee meetings. And there never really was any real goal. There was no committee charge, mission, purpose. In a lot of town governments, unlike ours, in a lot of town governments, they have a committee charge is required for any committee. And so a committee charge like this is not uncommon. In a city form of government, it's much less common, like Franklin. So therefore, that's why they've never really had them before, because our town charter is just structured so differently. In talking to a lot of folks in the community over the last couple of years, I think there's been kind of a desire to, have those bodies meet. Meet at least at some point, and 2, kind of redefine what the role is, if any, or whether we should just kind of get rid of the model, or whether we should kind of readdress it and think of what are the parameters for a committee to have. And I think after the last year or 2, and certainly with COVID and the budget issues the town had been facing, there was a little bit more discussion about how are we all going to work together to both engage the public on the operating budget, but also look toward the future and figure out how are we going to solve some of these budget issues that all of you have heard about numerous times regarding the schools, the DPW, and a variety of other smaller deficits for other agencies, and how are we going to get that information out to the public. So, and I should also mention the subcommittee for the town council. Just those 4 members that have been appointed in past years have not met often, and sometimes I think feel as if, and respectfully, that we get to a point way in the budget process too deep. And even though I may give budget updates at the town council meetings, I think there's a feeling of like, okay, it might be better if we knew what the deficit was and what the wish list was, and what are the drivers in the budget? So did a little research, and the council formally is going to vote at their next meeting on the whole list of goals. They just did a session this time, but nobody opposed this one. So given the fact that we're meeting tonight, and given the fact that when we hit February and March, things are going to start moving real quick, I thought I would jot out, based on some research of some other towns, a sample committee. And I didn't include it in the packet yet, just because I didn't have time to get it done before Friday. And so what I have here is just a simple charge of a framework of what the Joint Budget Subcommittee would do. I think in real life, outside of all the lingo here, I think ultimately what we're going to be doing, and the budget calendar was included in the packet, all departmental budgets are approved, are required to be in by Friday at noon. The finance director and the staff are going to spend the rest of January putting together the model of what the department heads have asked for and what the drivers are with Norfolk County and benefits and assumptions and all that stuff. Then I'm going to meet with the finance team and all of the individual departments throughout the month of February. And then what we'll do in March, I hope, by mid-March, I hope to have at least a first draft of what the FY23 budget would look like. And I hope to show a couple things. One, what's the wish list? What's the department's optimum budget? And then what's reality, seriously, of how much money do we have? And we're going to go through that discussion because you guys requested it at a prior meeting about revenues. But what do we have in revenues and what are our assumptions, and see where the deficit is, and allow the members, the way I have it written up would be the 4 members of the Town Council Budget Committee, the 3 members of the Finance Budget Committee, and the 3 members of the School Budget Committee would hopefully have a meeting in mid-March or early March, time, date to be determined, and try to have a discussion about what it is that the community, what are we trying to work on here, what are some of the solutions to some of the issues. For me, as folks may know, but for those at home or new to this, if you read Article 6, I believe it is in the town charter, the budget process is actually very well spelled out in the town charter. I think it's worked extremely well for the town for many decades. I wouldn't tinker with it. But I think given the fact that there's been a renewed interest in the operating budget from a lot of individuals through the town, and we're going into collective bargaining this year as well, I think it's a really good time to try to give some sort of framework to the Joint Budget Committee. And I think it's, with you have your role on the Finance Committee for how the budget liaisons work. The council kind of has their position on it, and the school committee has kind of a different charge. But I think that getting those 3 bodies together is a much, much better use of time than the 3 bodies individually having 3 separate nights where they discuss different aspects of the budget relative to whatever body we're talking about. And hopefully we'll generate a larger audience. Maybe we'll have some folks in the seats, Mr. Conley. Maybe we'll have some members that are paying attention. And I think most importantly for a lot of the newer members of all the committees, it'll be an educational process as to what the cost drivers are and what the issues are moving forward. So I wrote out here a short 1-page thing. I already went through the purpose, which is to promote the communication and collaboration during the town's annual budget process. Membership and appointment is, as I spoke of before, 4 of the town council, 3 of the school committee and finance committee. And then the responsibilities are fairly limited to promoting collaboration between the 3 most relevant finance-related committees, promoting broader communication and public engagement, keeping their respective board and committee members informed, and subcommittees maybe, meeting at least once a year during the annual budget process, which to me is the key part of the responsibilities, to help drive policy, not only for me, but also the departments, and then some other maintaining institutional knowledge of short and long-term budget forecasts, assisting the town administrator and superintendent of schools to develop strategies for meeting projected budget shortfalls. And also, while this is a fun play on words, but I think if you really look at the definition of an ombudsman, serving as an ombudsman to the town's annual operating budget process. So, Obviously, I have a clause in here that this doesn't supersede any of the statutory requirements under Mass General Law, the state budget process, or the town charter. But I'm trying to create at least a starting point for everybody. And Mr. Chairman, that's why it's on your first meeting of the year, because I'd like to bring this after discussion from you. Then I'll pass this through the school committee as well as the council. And if they're able to all vote or endorse it, then at least we'll have a process in place and can kind of move forward after that. I hope that answers at least some of the background. I hope it's pretty easy, and happy to obviously have a discussion and entertain any questions.
Yeah, just a few comments and questions where I ask other folks. And this is exactly a deal breaker. We currently have 4 members. As you know, we have a fairly informal subcommittee process and structure. The more liaison roles, and sometimes if you look over the years, sometimes we have 4 people on this subcommittee, 2 on this, 3 on that. And we currently have 4, but that'd be easy enough to, get it down to, we could write our management policy to reflect whatever this would say, and just have like no more than 3 on our own
Well,
joint committees.
I'm just going to go through the list real quick. I think you're right. So just for clarity, because I got the list right in front of me. So it says here, joint subcommittee is George, right?
Right. Nicole.
Also Nicole,
Natalie.
Natalie,
And Tyrell.
and Tyrell.
Correct.
Yep, you're right.
And George does double duty. He's on capital with me.
Sure.
And that, if I could just segue
No,
a
I'm
little-
happy, by the way, to put 4 in. That's not a problem at all.
Yeah,
That's
and it's
that's
really,
easy peasy.
and it's, I don't think it's that big a deal one way or the other, too. We could work that out. I would expect that it'd be, if this is implemented, at least for us, like, starting next fiscal year. Because I made the assignments again, somebody wanted to step aside, but I don't want to ask them to do that. So that was one thing, and sort of as a sidebar thing, and I know this is really dealing with the budget, because that's our primary responsibility, but capital's a big part of that too, and we have 2 other subcommittees. Are you gonna do something, there's gonna be language to the joint budget, and the schools probably wouldn't be involved in this, but would we be doing the same thing for our other joint committee assignments vis-à-vis capital and ECDC, or do we need to worry about that?
It's a good question. I think one of the, maybe, you could possibly do that. I think getting into the other areas probably doesn't make sense unless the capital budget. I think in the case of the school committee, the budget subcommittee for them kind of does all of it, right? So they kind of do double duty like George is. But maybe we see if this works out well through a budget process for a year, and if the model, I think you guys have been to a few of those in the past, and they can get quiet for some reason.
They're very short meetings too. if I
Very
recall.
short meetings, and so I think I'd like to see, before jumping into another committee right now to do a joint budget, maybe see how this model works for a year or 2, and then if people really think this was a great thing and really achieve some of the goals, then maybe we can look at some of the other ones for sure.
And one other point is, and I think you may have mentioned this a year ago when you were inviting people to a budget subcommittee, I believe. Nicole might have attended virtually, I think George attended in person, is that we were reminded, well, you can sit up here, but you can't have a vote.
Right.
So that should be spelled out also, just as a courtesy to us and the school committee, whether we have voting privileges or we have more in advisory. And the subcommittees, really, the council subcommittee, maybe they're the only ones who have a vote, but.
I wrote down here at the bottom, Mr. Chairman, the joint budget subcommittee shall be advisory only and will not supersede any legal obligation under MGL, Franklin Charter, da-da-da-da. So, I don't anticipate any votes.
Okay,
I don't think in the charge there's anything about a decision-making process.
okay.
It's really about promoting broader communication and public engagement. And I think the big thing I heard of over the last 12 to 18 months was the word collaboration. I think, just all about why aren't town boards collaborating more? I think it's come from this body, I think, at times too.
Has not the council members on that or any other committee, because they take minutes, they have formal meetings and stuff, have they not made a voting recommendation to the full council at any time?
Yeah, the town budget subcommittee, the town council budget subcommittee has never had a formal voting role in my 6 years, 7 budget cycles.
The capital has.
And that's why the capital actually, that's why the finance committee starts all of this off. And that's why, because the capital budget subcommittee of the council has always asked for the finance committee recommendations before they get the plan, the capital plan for that year to them. And we've had 3 different chairs in my tenure for the capital budget subcommittee. Councilor Pellegrini will serve again this term. She'll be the one, I think, that's now served 2 consecutive terms for 4 years. So she'll have the longest stint as the chair of that committee. And she's, every single time she asks, what does the finance committee vote on? We want to see the finance committee recommendation before it comes to us. So part of the capital process, as you see in the budget calendar, I might have taken it off, but because everybody got in their stuff, but it'll come to the finance committee in February, and then the town council will have their day at it later in February and into March. I wouldn't even anticipate this year the capital plan being fully approved by the council until best case scenario mid to late March, maybe more likely early April.
Okay. Any other?
But in terms of the budget subcommittee, they've never had a voting. It's the same.
They can
It's
vote.
suffered, I think, from the same issues that by the time it gets through the finance committee, well, first of all, by the time it gets through the finance director, and then the town departments, collective bargaining, and the TA and the finance committee, I think traditionally the budget subcommittee of the council has said, well, why don't we have all 9 members look at the budget? Why would 4 do it and then go to the 9? Let's just cut to the chase and go straight to the 9 members. Because all 9 members have a vested interest in the budget. So to carve out, I think this, I'm hoping, is going to be the town council budget subcommittee's real role, to have some input and hear some real opinions and get people knowledgeable about what the issues are. Is because, as you can imagine, they hear about this stuff all the time, especially on the campaign trail last year. And so hopefully this will kind of substitute for their own process on that.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the committee members? George?
I just, in the, I'll refer to it as the old days, the school committee had some authority to, I'll use the word, demand a certain amount, and the town had to provide it. I think I'm correct in that.
Before school autonomy. Before school autonomy was ended, yes.
Has that gone away? I mean, if the school if they want, what's their budget, 67-ish
68 million, yeah.
somewhere? If they came in and said, we want 70,
Yeah.
is there a rule in the state that says the town has to provide it?
Not to my knowledge.
Did there used to be?
No.
I'm going back to town meetings and that kind of
Oh.
stuff.
Fiscal autonomy
That's
prior
the
to
real,
2.5,
that is
but-
the real old days.
Yeah. Chris?
We have
Well, I didn't
to,
know if you took 10 years ago or 5 years.
No.
1980, ed reform in 1980.
93.
93, thank you, sorry, it's just
Yeah.
10 years off. We have to meet net school spending requirements. We're currently 7 million, 8 million over what we're required to spend on the schools.
For some reason or other, back here, there was I think there was a rather large fight, I'm gonna date myself, but in the mid-70s, where the school committee wanted X and basically demanded it at town meeting.
If that was the case, Mr. Chairman, my guess is Prop 2.5 and 81 probably wiped that out.
It did. It was school fiscal autonomy. It was
81,
passed in the
Chris?
50s.
Prop 2.5?
Yes,
81?
Prop 2.5.
80?
81,
84?
July of 81.
July of 81.
It wiped out fiscal autonomy. It wiped out
Yep.
the collective bargaining thing, the binding arbitration,
Arbitration.
capped
Striking.
property taxes, capped excise
Yep.
taxes, and stuff like that. But
Yep.
the schools had fiscal autonomy, and my memory is probably no better than George's, but I was a town meeting member in another town, and the schools asked for whatever they asked for, and a couple of selectmen got up and said, no, yeah, we gotta put the brakes on this, so they cut $100,000, which is really symbolic, because even then, that was a small amount for the schools. They're in Quincy District Court the next day, saying, give us back the money. Judge said, you have to give it to them.
Yep.
School fiscal autonomy. And that was one of the things that led to Prop 2.5. That and Chapter 766 unfunded mandates, so they did, George, you're correct, they did have that sort of authority back then.
And through that same point, to that historical context, the town of Franklin redid its entire form of government in the late 70s. So it was right around that same time where all of this came into play, and the charter that, we benefit from today was written in 1978. There was a 1984 commission to review the 1978 decision, and by a very narrow vote of 1, the town kept its current town charter in place, and they've done like a town charter review every 10 or 15 years since. But I think that point in time at the turn of the decade from the 70s to 80s, Mr. Chairman, I think you're right. There was just a whole slew of things that got altered quickly under various statutes. And Chris is right on the net school spending came into play in 93. But obviously, the town of Franklin doesn't suffer from that problem. That's one of the issues, obviously, we're trying to get out to the public and talk about, is the $7 million over what we need to, so.
Okay. Any other?
Yeah, one other about this committee. This is not, I don't think, intended to do what we do in our hearings, where the police chief sits there and we go through, the only time, I think, in public, where the budget has gone through line by line by line by line and questions. Is that, do you intend for that to be happening in the joint budget committee?
No. I don't think any of the language in the roles or responsibilities, I'm hoping, even with the most liberal attempt, nothing can be interpreted in here as going anywhere into that level of depth as the Finance Committee. I hope it spells it out fairly reasonably in terms of their core responsibilities, which is really, again, and the reason why I put that line at the end, by the way, serving as an ombudsman, if you look at the definition, obviously it's not in one person, which is traditionally an ombudsman, right? But to investigate individuals, to look to solve problems of great public conflict. I think that fits here, because there's going to be conflict. There's going to be a wish list of more money than we have. That happens every year. And so this entity should be probing those questions more globally, I think, George, than what you guys do, which is really going through not just every single line, but asking questions of all the department heads over a long period of time and really doing some deep dives into each of the department budgets and asking questions about trends and all the stuff that you normally ask for. So I don't see any overlap on that.
And I think to George's point, that last line that you have, Jamie, because I believe town code does give us our charge and responsibility as the Finance Committee. I believe that does spell out what our duties are. I have to double check that. But.
Article 6-2 of the town charter.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Natalie or Chana, anything? Nope. Think that's it? Chana, did you want to say something?
No, I was just gonna say no, nothing from me.
Okay, thank you. So I don't think there's any more questions or comments tonight, Jamie.
Just, you don't necessarily have to have a full vote, but just if you wanted to support it, it might be at least worthwhile for consensus. It sounds to me like the consensus of the committee that's here supports the charge as presented.
I'd support it. I can look at members and they're nodding their heads.
Okay, great.
So I would say we're supportive of that. It makes a lot of sense, and anything
Right.
that improves the process is good.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
The next order of business, Jamie, is the 23 operating budget revenues and sheet analysis. Let me rephrase that. The 23 operating budget revenue sheet analysis and discussion.
Yep.
So you and Chris
So,
can take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, as you know, there had been a few members of the committee over the last year or so on our future agenda items had wanted, I suppose, a little bit deeper of a dive into the revenue sheet. So I figured, seeing as how this is the cornerstone of the whole budget, we would take a few minutes tonight and go through our revenue sheet. It's kind of a 101. And I'm hoping that tonight's discussion serves as a record to really explain exactly how we assume things in the budget and where the monies are coming from. So if folks go to www.franklinma.gov and go to the town calendar, you'll see there the Finance Committee meeting tonight. In that packet, there is a sheet. If you scroll through it, you can follow along for the folks at home. But if you look at the revenue sheet in the middle of the packet, you'll notice at the top it says for discussion purposes only. We're trying to illustrate a point. Nobody should take this as if this is the defined revenue sheet and this is how much money we have and start strategizing. This is really just a basic model to try to show everybody where the money comes from. So if folks start at the top, you'll see we have final FY21, final FY22, and proposed FY23. Obviously, 22 is not complete yet. And you'll notice the tax levy category is the first chunk. Prior year levy limit plus 2.5. So what the finance director does is takes the previous year's levy of 82.7 million, does it by 2.5%, and you get 85.89 million. And what we do is put the increase decrease on the side. So the 2.5 levy for FY23 will be 3.2 million under this model in extra revenue to spend next year. Beneath that is the new growth number. You'll see under the proposed 1.224716. That is the 10-year average that we have used according to town policy to determine new growth. And I think we've talked many times at the Finance Committee members before. When you look at the new growth chart, you'll remember a few years ago we got 1.9 million, 1.8, these record-breaking numbers. Well, that's why we don't use last year's number, We don't use it automatically because things go south. And you can see that with FY22, from 21 to 22, it's $500,000 less than new growth. And the trend, by the way, is continuing to head in that direction. Financing of projects have dried up. The pandemic has made people obviously more conservative, less risky. These are market-based systems into both the commercial sector, but also, just as importantly, the residential sector. Up until the pandemic, and even the first year of the pandemic, I've spoken about this many times, people had home improvements financed, in process, contractors hired. And so when the pandemic hit, a lot of those projects continued on for residential homeowners. You got the kitchen remodel. So when the assessors go back to reevaluate your property and they see all brand new stainless steel, state-of-the-art stuff in the house, or a big new deck on the back, or a new roof, or a new facade, another room that they've built, a basement, whatever it might be, that improves the value of the property, and that gets captured on a year-to-year basis, largely within new growth. I'm generalizing heavily. So that 1.224 number will not look like that in my budget model. It'll be, in all likelihood, a detour from the 10-year average. Why? I can't write a check I can't cash, and I cannot say with any close certainty that we would even hit this year's new growth model, let alone the 10-year average. So the 10-year average, we go in, and this is important for people to understand. We work with our finance team that's here tonight, including our assessor, Kevin, who's not here, and we try to say, well, what's the market conditions? We talk to the building inspector. We talk to the board of assessors. We talk to town department heads. I read a lot of other geeky information from different places about the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, and you read mass benchmarks, and you see, where's this going? Are people lending money? Are they not? Are people holding on to money? Are they saving money? Because that ends up having a big impact on these numbers, and you have to say to yourself, if you're me, well, geez, can I meet that number? Otherwise, I'm just going to be cutting services in May and June. So traditionally, Jeff and town of Franklin has been very conservative on those numbers. For George and some of the others who've been on this committee a long time, you remember Jeff used to just stick in 800,000, 900,000. And obviously the budget pressures on the town and the desire for more revenue, for more services has driven up to get back to that 10-year average. But I don't think that that's going to be there. And of course, the net decrease you can see 118,000 increase, but that's ultimately not going to be like that in all likelihood when we get to March, depending on how the market goes. So before I move, well, I'll go on one more. The debt exclusions, those are all votes taken by taxpayers at the ballot to raise taxes for a specific project. And then after the treasurer collector goes out and does all the work to borrow for that length of time, then after the 20, 30, 40 year, whatever it is, then those taxes then sunset and these come off the books. But right now, this is a list of the active debt exclusions the town has voted for. And as you'll notice in the right column, or in the center column in FY23, those are all fixed numbers that come from our treasurer and finance director. And then you'll see the delta of that, obviously, in the right-hand column. And as you can see, we've talked about this again at many, many times at finance committee meetings. You can see a lot of parentheses, which means a lot of those projects are on the downward slope. And that our debt capacity in the budget overall, we should be really discussing over the next 10 years, how are we going to maintain that 3%, 3.5%. Otherwise, when you start losing money like this, if you notice the net under this model is $42,444, well, that's $42,444 that may get added in somewhere else or try to be shifted around. So that should try to use that model. So that ultimately comes down to the total potential tax levy, which is under state statute. That's from Prop 2.5. And so therefore you have a net of $3.278 million of an increase over last year in terms of the town's legally allowable tax levy. Should I stop there, Mr. Chairman, if folks have questions on the first section before we get to state revenues?
Why are they decreasing? Is it just that they're being paid off, or is there
Just-
rate change, or?
Gary?
Yes. So a lot of them, other than the high school, they're gonna be dropping off. They've hit the end of their term, so.
But the loan was consistent. I mean, the loan didn't, so this is a result of us paying the loans down. Okay.
Yep.
Any other questions? I guess you can carry on.
Okay. So you see on the next section, state revenue. That's all, basically what we do in FY23. This model, again, I'm just gonna say it so many times, not accurate. Why? If you notice what we did was we just transposed FY22 into 23. The governor will put out his budget probably at the end of the month. The MMA conference is in 2 weeks. Usually he does it there. And it's basically all of that is Chapter 70, charter school, UGA, and other related state formulaic issues on state formula, state revenues. We plug in House 1, Governor Baker's budget. House 2, I think, this year. I should be mistaken. He'll file that budget, and we will plug in the governor's numbers into those items. There's no discretion on the town's part, nothing we can do about it. You just put in the numbers and take what you get and move on. But as everybody knows, we adjust those later in the year, in November, when we come back to adjust the budget, because the House has passed their numbers in April, the Senate does their budget in May, the conference committee gets their budget done by hopefully the 4th of July. And as we know, there's a propensity to go into August at times on the legislative front. And our fiscal year is oftentimes 1, 2, 3, 5 months into the fiscal year before we get those final numbers, which is why we come back in November to revise the numbers. If we've lost money or gained money, we revise all those numbers when we come back to do the budget in the fall. But those are basically your state numbers and what you get. Any questions?
They're not material enough to affect the rate that the council set in December?
Well, traditionally they're not, because fortunately there's been good stability. But if you were to go into a really deep economic recession, the community would then have to say, well, geez, do we want to raise taxes enough to compensate for the loss in state aid? So unless there's an economic, collapse of some sort, generally speaking, those revenues stay fairly stable over time. Okay. Other revenues, the next category, this is a big one. This is local receipts. This is what makes up, liquor license fees, building fees, motor vehicle excise tax is probably half of that number, roughly, maybe a little bit less, 45% or so. And we do the best we can to guess at what the market will show. We look at past year's revenues, look out a year. I think we had a lot of discussion on local receipts publicly during the pandemic because we obviously lost a lot of revenue, but we kind of kept ourselves going pretty well with our online permitting. The two issues that are going to face local receipt, well, three issues this year. One, I am very, very concerned that we are definitely not going to have the same kind of robust permitting fees that we have had over the last several years for the aforementioned market conditions I just mentioned. Even asked the building commissioner today, how's the ZBA business, and he said slow. So when that happens, ultimately, revenues dip. Two other clauses, and we'll get to it in the financial policies. Traditionally, the hotel tax money has been off budget until November. Due to the fact that the hotels have obviously suffered a major loss in the last couple years, I'm going to propose to put the hotel revenue into the operating budget and change the town financial policies. I actually met with the hotels today, and they're at anywhere from 40 to 60% occupancy on a good day. That's half of what they had pre-pandemic, where they were typically between 75 and 90, 88% occupancy, strong all the time. So why is that important? Well, that revenue lost occupancy for them means a 6% reduction in revenues for us. And so I don't see the hotel industry coming back anywhere close to what we had pre-pandemic in the near future. Maybe in a few years when it bounces back and we're back in some sort of rhythm. And Gillette has its concerts again, and Great Woods has all its concerts again, and Dean College is inviting families back again. I mean, all of those things that happened in the last 2 years have really hurt our hotel industry in Franklin. And so we're trying to work with them on rebounding that. The third thing I'd say, Mr. Chairman, is the cannabis excise tax fee, the 3% on all sales in town. We now have 2 stores open. Previously, we had set a policy setting aside those revenues for capital. And I think I'm going to recommend to everybody that we just plug that revenue source into the operating budget. Our capital program's doing quite well. And so I think the operating budget probably needs as much support as possible. And it's also a very fluctuating tax. I mean, it's based on sales. So, 1 year you could have a lot, next month you have a little. It's hard to say right now, but we're going to try to get the excise tax put in there to try to support the operating budget. So, local receipts will likely change quite a bit from what we have here. But I wanted to explain at least to everybody what they were and what the dynamics are. Any other questions?
So, I ask every year, I think. We get no pilot payment from the school, right? Dean?
No.
That's unusual, because I've done my research.
Yep, and I've said it consistently, and I'll say it until it happens. The only way you get pilots is by building positive relationships with the people that work there, and it's not just the town administrator. I have a phenomenal relationship with Dr. Rooney. I'll miss her dearly. She's been here for 27 years. She's a great partner. We have a phenomenal relationship with all the staff over there. The community needs to support them. I can't tell you how many times I've seen this in my 22 years in this business. You're not going to win the debate at the state level of taxing institutions who are now not taxed. Higher education, schools, religious institutions, etc., nonprofits, it's just a very, the effect of changing that law is so substantial, while colleges and universities, especially right now, are suffering hugely. And as I know Representative Roy has said many times, and I've said, what would you do with that school if it's not there? I grew up in the town of Bolton. The town of Lancaster had a college. It went out of business. It's still dormant in the center of town, Atlantic Union. It's been sitting there for decades with no use. And so having a positive relationship from the community-wide, all the neighbors, the people who live around it, widespread is unquestionably the most proven successful model in generating a pilot agreement with a school. They need to feel some love and they need to give some love, but it's hard to get love when you're not giving love.
What prompted me this year is I noticed another piece of property, commercial property, on School Street has now transferred to the college. Now, and I
And-
realize it's not big dollars. It
Well,
just,
But
And it-
through you,
and
Mr. Chairman, but I will say, Dean, from those positive relationships, they do pay property taxes on the McGurrow House building downtown. There is an agreement with them at a time when there was love. You know, the previous predecessor worked out a great deal with the school for that to be on the tax rolls. That building, I've been told, is actually going to continue to be on the tax rolls. Dean is going to pay the appropriate taxes affiliated with that. And I like to believe that the relationships that we've all built with them have helped encourage that. I think they want to be a good community partner, but I don't think I'm telling tales too far out of school. That sometimes they've had some shots taken at them, and that doesn't help. It makes it worse.
I gotta ask once a year, that's
Yeah.
all, you know.
So, through you, Mr. Chairman, down to the next category, other available funds. What the finance director does is put in other transfers that may have come in from another source, maybe a budget stabilization account transfer, or MEC stabilization, other things that are not part of the regular revenue process get thrown into that category from other transfers. Pretty similar stuff. And then you end up at the end with total revenues and other funds. And in this model, that's a $134.7 million budget, and before the other deductions come off the books. Any questions so far?
None
Good.
for me.
Okay.
Just real quick,
Oh,
on the,
sure.
sorry, for the hotel taxes and the cannabis taxes where you mentioned flipping them from the capital
Yep.
budget to the operating budget, is that something that, does that just go through the normal chain of voting and approval? And then is that something, so then if our capital budget isn't as healthy as it is now, can we easily flip-flop it with a similar vote, or how does that work to?
I will admit that it's definitely not easy to flip-flop, because once you say you were raising $500,000 in revenues through those sources, then taking them out of the operating budget then leaves a structural deficit of $500,000. By the way, the capital program, there's just more flexibility, and this body was supportive of the fire trucks last year, which is a great example. There's more techniques with borrowing that you can do. And I've also come to the conclusion that, and I think a lot, especially the cannabis industry, has been so fluid, and everybody's learning, what the market is like. And shouldn't be surprising to everybody that when this first came, it was going to result in trillions of dollars for everybody, and green was going to be all over the place. And the reality is that it's now really starting to settle out. I don't expect those revenue sources to be so large in the next several years that it's going to mean, it'll make a lot, those dollars I think are going to go a lot further in the operating budget than they would in a capital program. It's a great question, though.
Any other questions or comments? None? Okay.
Okay. And then going down to the next section, the last section is assessments and other votes. And so, once you get into here, you get the deductions out of the state assessments, school choice. The one that folks, rightfully so, aim right in on, aside from all the other numbers, are really the charter school assessment, which in this model is just over $5 million. And that's a result of state law from 1993 that Chris had mentioned earlier. where, you know, the students that go from town to the charter school, the per pupil cost goes with them. And so that's a deduction, essentially, for lack of a better word, off of our roll sheet. And again, all of these other things are generally baked in the state law, county assessments, things like that. We still have a county form of government in Franklin with Norfolk County. Other counties have abolished county government. So the model for their sheets looks different because there is no county government. And then you end up down at the bottom with a net total revenue, one way or another. And as you can see, the impact on the increase, decrease doesn't actually impact because the tax levy and all the other revenue sources still amount to 3.4 million, but the total proposed budget is decreased a bit by those deductions in state law, which comes down to the total general fund budget. And then what we try to have at the bottom is not an unused levy. Typically that looks at zero. But the way that we write the numbers out, that number at the number in the column of 984,192 in deficit, that number will almost assuredly be a lot larger when you see this model in March. That's your budget deficit.
Right.
Ultimately, that's the number that people are going to look at some point and they say, oh, that's where the decisions have to get made. What's the delta and what are we going to do about it and what are the cost drivers? That's linked obviously to the operating budget, which is not included here because we're just talking about the revenues, but ultimately that's the number at the bottom that everybody's going to want to see and look at. That's the number I highlight every year in March, and we base our fiscal forecast for the year off of.
Okay.
That's it.
Any other questions or comments?
That's
before we
Chris
move on?
Sandini's life in a nutshell.
Looking forward to March.
And he does it in like 5 minutes. I did it in 20, 30.
Well, thank you for the presentation and the data. It is helpful. And so moving on to the next order of business, which is related, the biennial review of the Town of Franklin financial policies.
So through you, Mr. Chairman, so I did not get an opportunity, because we are really busy, to actually go through and redline it out. I just wanted to go through and have a discussion with the committee to get some feedback on a few highlights in here, and if there's other issues folks want to bring up, you know, more than happy to. And then what I'll probably do, Mr. Chairman, is bring this back at the February meeting with some actual revisions and some language changes. But most of these policies have been in place for a while, even looking through them without wordsmithing. I'm not getting into that really. It's really more about the principles. You know, number 4, financial reserves. You know, one of the questions I have in there that we should maybe think of later on is, you know, we created an open space stabilization policy. Do we still want to have that in lieu of the fact that the Community Preservation Act has been passed? I'd say at this juncture, you're probably all set with CPA relative to open space. Not saying deposits can't still be made into the stabilization account, but at the time, we were trying to save up, and that was a little bit. That would be something I would raise that we might want to, you know, eliminate. If we go on to the next page, the hotel motel tax, I had mentioned already, number 13. Notice in here, it says these funds should continue to be used for open space or capital and not used for the annual operating budget, so we'd have to make a revision there if everybody was supportive. Number 14, the marijuana excise tax policy. Same thing, it's basically for capital, and we would take that out and revise it. In fact, it even says funds shall not be used for ongoing operating budget expenditures. I think we would propose to change that. The roads and infrastructure policy is something that if folks want to see Brutus again, if they haven't heard his voice on their voicemails enough in the last couple weeks, January 19th, Brutus is going to be doing a full budget presentation before the council to dive very deep into what the DPW is looking at in the coming year. Because as I've said to all of you, and I've said to many, they really are the one department that people are going to really have to come up with some solutions for soon. We put in here a placeholder of $600,000 in the annual operating budget for roads. I'm not even sure that that's even feasible. And so we're gonna have to have a discussion on that policy, because I kind of feel like in reviewing these policies, the town does a really good job adhering to these. And then there are a few like this one where, are we shooting for the stars too high? Do we even have a plan on how to do this? And we really don't. So it's a policy that we really can't yet meet. And I think we have to have a discussion at all levels on that. And then finally, the copy online does not have the budget stabilization policy that this group passed last year, so obviously we'd include that in there. At first glance and a couple reads, those are the big areas. And so, that I can see in here. Most of the rest of this still stands pretty strong in terms of the minimum amount in sewer, the minimum amount in our water enterprise funds for emergencies, the refuse. You know, a year ago, we thought we were gonna be hugely in the red. Now we're not. Now you can't get anybody to pick up the recycling because everybody's out with COVID, so it's still a market-based system. We're gonna have to see how that shakes out, but so far it's been okay. We've been able to get through okay. So I'm happy to talk about any of these other policies in here, but those are the ones that jump off the page at me that we'd want to talk about next month as well. And obviously, we can have a discussion about it tonight if folks want.
Yeah, I think it'd probably be helpful, certainly for me to go through and actually read them again. I look at them probably every year at the start of the year, just to remind myself, because I know there's a lot of things that impact what we do. And so the other members too, they can speak up now if they want to discuss it now, but it'd be nice if we could read it in advance. And like I said, they're on the web, they're under the town council
Yep.
website.
And they're on the finance committee website as well.
Right, the fiscal policy, so, and I can send the link out too sometime. So as we can read them on our own, then when you bring back any proposals that you're gonna wanna submit to the council, then we can discuss it better then.
Okay.
Sound good? Okay.
Sounds great.
Just going along, not a vote yet. The next thing, and speaking of votes, under general business, Nicole submitted the minutes for December 8th. We've all had a chance to read those. Is there any omissions or additions to the minutes of December 8th? Seeing none, we'll do a roll call vote to approve the minutes of December 8th. Nicole?
John? Chana?
Yes.
Natalie?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Nicole is yes. George?
Yeah.
And Bill?
Aye. I should specify, it should be the ayes and nays. So that's a 7-0 vote, correct?
Mhm.
Unanimously. The next item under general business is the budget calendar. And I hope everybody had a chance to look at that, the revised budget calendar and our finance committee schedule, which I don't think is too much unchanged from what you proposed at the last meeting, our schedule at least.
Yeah, the only meeting, there is like COVID, I've had cancellations personally as well. On the April 20th meeting, I might not be able to make that meeting, but we can either postpone it, or you can have an agenda on some other topics where you don't need me.
Now, is that one of the budget hearings?
No, that's the meeting 2 weeks before the budget hearing.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So-
I don't have it in front of me, so I
Yep.
apologize. All right. And I don't think that requires any vote for
Nope.
us.
I just wanted to make sure the folks, if people had question on the budget process or timeline, happy to answer those. That's why I put the budget calendar thing in there.
And the next item is the stabilization account update.
I have a
In
question.
here somewhere, right?
The last page.
It's the same numbers. I think it's been for a while. I think. Oh, there it is.
It's at the very back.
Yep.
I have two questions.
Yep.
Well, actually, three. Property acquisition is, I know I should know, but I'm missing something. Is it the town buying land for the North Fire Station, let's say? Or, what is that?
It's probably not, the verbiage probably doesn't give it justice. I believe I think they started a fund for the facilities department at one point to try to save money. The problem we've always run into with both technology and facilities is they need so much money that you can't both do the stuff you need to get done this year and save money. And so it was a futile attempt to stash money aside, even if you had a policy that said 100,000 should go into the stabilization fund. You know, generally speaking, there's gonna be people that are always gonna say, well, I could use that now for some, big project at a school or, whatever, so. But that's a facilities, stabilization fund, and I believe Chris is nodding his head that it's only to be spent, for facility upgrades.
And yet, we're
I'm not so sure the acquisition part is correctly describes
had
the
to-
account.
stow away $2.5 million.
No.
Is that the one?
Property acquisition, 290.
Properties.
Oh, I'm sorry, farther down, you're right. I'm listening to it.
'Cause open
I'm not
space
sure of
is
how
what
much
we-
property you could
Right,
buy for
right.
$291,000 anyway.
Right,
But beyond that, it's for facility upgrades, right, Chris? It's not for acquisition.
I believe so, it's a specialized stabilization account like the other,
Yeah.
like the field replacement and so
Yeah.
forth. But it goes back several years, I
Yeah.
don't think there's been any action.
I can tell you in my 6 years here, I know for a fact, we've never pulled money out of that account to spend for something. Because there's been a debate when I first got here, let's keep putting money in that account, and then everybody'd say, well, we need it for this big drainage problem or windows, whatever, and, okay, well, so you can't, it's just been hard.
okay, thanks. Sorry, George.
The fire truck stabilization, my hunch is that that's probably no longer needed. We fund the ambulances out of the receipts. and
I can
think
assure
we
you
took-
that Chief McLaughlin
Well, yeah, he'll
will
find
suggest.
something to buy.
Yeah, and he, and I think, kudos to both the chief and like Ryan Jetty. We'll have a discussion with Ryan soon. He is trying to weigh whether to use CPA money for all of his rec stuff to free up free cash. I think the chief certainly understands there's a lot of priorities among a lot of departments, and he knows that he's pretty well set for trucks for a few years. But I would never take the account off the books, because someday we're gonna have to start saving pennies again, for whatever the next wave of fire trucks are after that.
And yeah,
So I wouldn't eliminate the account. I think what you'll see in my capital plan this year is just not storing another $100,000 away into that account.
Can it be used for repairs and whatnot, or is that an off?
I don't think so.
Because I know the tower ladder's been out of business for a month now.
Yeah. I don't
And
think
I
so.
think it's hydraulics or something, but
Yeah.
probably, my guess is the bill's gonna be bigger than that anyway.
I think it was a fairly limited account to the purchase.
And the only other question I have, and it's a off-the-wall question, I admit it. I look at the $10.3 million in OPEB, and I wonder at what point, I mean, here we've got this $10.3 million squirreled away. When does it get used? At what point? I mean, in the budget, that's close to 1 year, I think, if I remember correctly. I don't know, it just seems like, there it is, we've done it, now what do you do with it?
So this is a great question. I know Chris has an answer, and I'm going to let him have his answer for sure. He may say the same thing when Dan Sherman allows us to spend it. No. Dan Sherman is coming back for his annual road show on March 3rd at the council meeting. It's a great question. I think we're tentative. I mean, I'm sure there's a way to use it even in the near term, but the more you take away, the further you now are against your liability.
Plus,
Still, even though we're in the top 10% of towns in the state ahead of the game on this, we're still so far behind. Chris, do you?
Yeah, so, right now, every employee that works for the town is costing the town money in the future when they retire.
which were taken out of current operating budgets.
The ones that are already retired, you are correct. The idea behind this fund is eventually this fund will grow to a size that will pay the benefits for all of us when we retire. So we're recognizing the cost now for when we retire. And on top of that, we're including the folks that are already retired that we're paying out of our current
So
operating
theoretically,
funds.
the income on this giant fund will pay the current benefits, is that?
But
The benefits of retirees.
that's correct. And I think where you asked more specifically, when do we get to tap into it, right? Like, and I think eventually there's gonna come a day where the bill for health insurance is far larger than what we have now. And then that's when you're gonna use it. And we're not at that boiling point. Some people are gonna say we are, because they see money. That's just not true. The liability that's calculated out is at 70-something odd million for a reason. To Chris's point, this is almost, I mean, this is for people that are, I mean, it is for people who currently retired, but also, we're talking a long way out here. You know, I would say decades at least, wouldn't you?
Yes,
Yeah.
30 years.
2040, 20?
I have to look. I don't.
I know
wanna
they
say-
reconfigure the
it was
year of
20
when they're gonna be,
2038.
2038, yeah, it's 2040. It'll go up to 2040, then 2044, then they'll kick it down a few years later, 2038 again. So it's, you know, 20, 30, 40 years from now.
Plus, I'll have one more that no one in this room has an answer for. I'll tell you that right up front. If we suddenly in the country get smart and have Medicare for all, or whatever the thing is, does that in theory then go away? Because, you know, you look at all the costs related to that, to the Medicare bit.
Yeah.
If these kinds of numbers went out of local budgets, think of the impact all across the spectrum, the states, the towns, everybody. Is that, am I wacko to think that if they ever get smart and actually do something about it, that wouldn't be needed anymore? And then what do we do with it? Nice problem to have, but, you know, there's gonna be something.
I will tell you that Vermont tried it, and 3 years later rescinded it, so, for what it's.
But yeah, well, you can't do it individually, it's gotta be a
If,
coast to coast, north, border to border kind of thing, but, sorry.
it,
I was
no, you
awake
shouldn't
too
be
much
sorry,
last
actually. We do discuss these issues at the IAC, because obviously health insurance is an issue that a lot of people are happy and upset about. It's like traffic. As people, frequent attendees of the IAC know, I tell people all the time, if you're looking for a better health insurance plan that, you know, is cheaper, doesn't cost you as much on your, you know, the frequent argument we get obviously is, well, my pay went up 2%, but my health insurance went up 7%, right? It's not as easy as that, but, and I joke with the folks, I said, if you're looking for that, you might as well, you know, go for Medicare for all. And we've talked about it with our health consultants before, healthcare consultants. And yeah, I think it would put a lot of healthcare consultants out of business. I think, like, you remember when Reagan offered the Social Security retirement benefit issue in the 80s, the state of Massachusetts declined, but that was a very big program where those states paid in a lot more and then some states didn't. It was a huge federal, there was a huge federal initiative. Obamacare was the same thing. So I think when that time comes, if it comes, there will be a deal offered to states to either get in, get out, you know, whatever the dynamics are. This money might be required to be paid towards that system. You know, it's a great philosophical question. We actually do talk about it in our healthcare negotiations from time to time, just to have a fun discussion, because that's what we do.
Depends on your idea of fun, isn't it?
I can speak for us. We have a blast with it. We do. Chris, Carrie, we do. Yeah.
Any other questions on that item? The next item is future agenda items. Do any members have any future agenda items that we haven't already discussed? You know, we have the capital next month along with the fiscal policies, then we have some other meetings coming up. I just would remind you, Jamie, we brought up in the past that, and you brought up refuse, I guess that would include recycling, that's always been on our radar. And I know you mentioned Brutus he's doing the DPW generally, or roads specifically on that town council meeting night, because that's another thing that we brought up, that maybe, especially because we have so many new members, how the town does the road grading, program.
Yep.
So, and we have meetings in the spring, we have it after the operating budget too, so whatever's convenient.
I think it'll probably, my guess is in March or April, one of those meetings is, I know you're gonna go through it with Brutus again in May during the hearings for the actual budget, but given the size and scope of what he's dealing with these days, which is really, really a lot, I add into the federal money, the ARPA funds, stormwater, water mains, sewer, the 2.5 million money down in MassWorks, down on Grove Street. These are huge projects, in addition to wish lists of items in town from residents on drainage, trails maintenance, the SNET, a whole slew of stuff. Maybe what we'll do is have him come in and do his presentation that we do at the council, and could get into a lot more back and forth about what options those are in March and April. Because I think that one's really gonna be big, and that would include trash and recycling.
Sure. That's why I figured we dedicated a night just to that. That was my thinking originally, but obviously that's something for you to work out with
Yep.
him, because we all know he's busy, so. Any other future agenda items? Nothing at home? Having said that, I'd make a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion's
Just
been,
take a roll call vote.
need a roll call vote for that.
John?
Aye.
Chana?
Yes.
Natalie?
Yes.
Dave?
Aye.
Nicole is yes. George?
Yes.
And Bill?
Aye. 7-0. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you February 9th, I think. Meeting is adjourned.
And gone.
Just,
That's the go.
I didn't wanna say it on camera, because I didn't wanna jump.
You're listening to Franklin Radio, another great service of Franklin TV.
I'm Diane Joyce on Franklin Radio, playing a bit of this, a little of that, and all that jazz. If you're a Franklin senior, come for an affordable breakfast or lunch at the Franklin Senior Center Common Grounds Cafe. Enjoy good food and good friends. Call 508-520-4945 for details. That's 508-520-4945.